Welcome to Geek Warning, the podcast that puts the world's most interesting cycling tech and more into one place. I'm Suvi Loponen, and today I am joined by Ronan McLaughlin.
Hiya.
Alex Hunt.
Hello.
And I'm leaving Dave Rome last because, Dave, you're somewhere more exotic than any of us.
As someone from Australia, I don't know how exotic Adelaide is, but yes, I am not at home. I'm in Adelaide for the Tour Down Under, the 25th year of the event. Not the 25th time I've attended. I think it's like my 10th maybe. But yeah, it's the start of the World Tour season. All the men's teams are here. I'd say I haven't done the count. I believe it's a little under half the women's World Tour teams are here. And yeah, it's sort of a first chance to see all the new tech and bikes that they're on. Nice
one. How many bikes have you seen this far?
Loads of bikes. As far as professional bikes, I've been here. I got in at midday. It's now 8 p.m. I have photographed 9 pro bikes. So I'm almost a third of the way there.
Let's get going.
So, making good progress.
Yeah. And we can see those pro bikes up on Escape Collective soon.
Yes, very soon. Hopefully they'll be trickling in by the time you're hearing this. So yeah, keep an eye out on the site for that. We've got some cool new bikes that brand new to the World Tour, fresh paints, some really fresh bikes like XDS, and yeah, a few little changes here and there that are worth talking about.
Nice one. And as usual, now for Geek Warning, Brad Copeland is also going to join the pod later to answer some of your Ask a Rental questions. And before we get into today's show, I also wanted to say that if you're an Escape member, then thank you. We've started to add Escape ads into a free podcast, but you won't hear them if you're an Escape member. And if you're not a member yet, then you will hear them. And we would really appreciate if you considered becoming a member.
Yep. And obviously you get access to the members-only feed, which includes all the bonus episodes, including Roden's performance process, which comes every second week. And being a member also gains you access to all the member-exclusive content that we have online that we believe is worth paying for. So anyway, enjoy the podcast either way.
Nice. This week's episode, on our minds section, is going to be something that has been on my mind and probably quite a lot of other people's minds because it's been a lot in the headlines, this topic, which is AI. Because especially in the UK, apparently it's going to get unleashed. I think this is the word that has been used by the politicians in the UK. And what I've been thinking is kind of where does AI sit in the cycling world? And especially when it comes to tech, are we going to see actual AI-driven bikes? Are we going to see more components designed by AI? Like, where do we use AI at the moment? And kind of, where do we go?
I think before we talk about where it's claimed to be used, it might be worth just discussing, like, the difference between, I guess, real AI and perhaps the more common usage that we've seen. I mean, Alex, you probably have some thoughts to share on this.
Yeah, I think the more you actually talk to people in this space, the more you realise there's actually not a general consensus on this topic of what actual genuine artificial intelligence is. Because artificial intelligence is probably best thought of as this big umbrella that a lot of other things sit under. And one of those is machine learning, which is actually where I would say the overwhelming majority of what would be called AI sits, which is essentially where you give a computer program loads and loads of data. You normally separate it into 75% is used to be input data, and then the other 25% is kind of like a verification data. But essentially what you're doing is the more inputs you feed through this program, the better it can become at predicting what the outcome should be. And generally speaking, this is done with hundreds of thousands or millions of points of data. And essentially it just becomes a prediction model. It's the same as if you were to have a three-sided coin and it was heads, tails, and another thing. You'd be able to flip a coin 100,000 times, and by the end it should be able to roughly predict what the outcome should be each time. Whereas what artificial intelligence is often thought of is this almost sentient computer that can just make thoughts on its own, create things, and is just kind of left to run on its own devices. But I think actually when you pull back the skin a little bit at the minute, you realise that almost nothing executes that model.
Yeah, so I mean, assuming like the things we're seeing in cycling are not artificial intelligence, and it's more data driven, or in some cases, a term I hear from brands is generative design, where they basically put in like the engineering parameters, say like, we need this strength, this stiffness, this weight, and then the computer runs through potentially thousands of different versions of the thing until it finds the most efficient way to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Suvi, what are some examples of this?
Well, there's been, especially in the kind of generative design sphere, there's SRAM had this project with their crank arms they were working with, and more, I guess, design program, Autodesk.
A popular CAD program. Yeah.
Exactly. Do exactly what you were describing. And I think the CAD sphere is where it comes up a lot. This kind of what the generative design, what AI can bring into the kind of shapes and design process. It's not necessarily designing the product, it's helping with it.
Yeah. That crank example you give is actually in production. It's I believe it's the SRAM XO crank in the mountain bike world. It's got it's an aluminium crank with like the hole in the center of it, and that's basically what they claim came from generative design. But Alec?
Where a lot of brands are using it, especially in this kind of design space, it's just refining and streamlining the design process. Essentially, instead of a human actually having to go through iteration after iteration, like you say, you can feed in roughly what it has to be, or boxes it definitely has to tick. And then you can just let this run and cycle through potentially hundreds of thousands of models, changing things very so slightly each time. But you essentially can then get graphs or data sets that then allow you to select what actually the best design ultimately is.
So as a tech editor, I probably shouldn't be admitting this, but when I see AI in a press release, my mind just switches off and finds something else to focus on. So with that said, where else are brands claiming to use this? Because I genuinely just have ignored it.
Kind of is my feeling as well. I'm every time I see it, I'm like, is this the protein of the cycling world, where if we slap protein on a Mars bar, people are going to buy it because that's the buzzword at the moment in nutrition. Is AI just,
I'm not sure on that, because I think protein, if you're using that example, is pretty widely accepted that the general public see that as a good thing. I think AI is far more divisive, rather. I think some people see it and go, that's really cool. But I also think there's a lot of skepticism around AI, and I think whether rightly so or not, I think people are more nervous about approaching AI products.
Yeah, I'd also just say about the AI in general that we're not AI experts. And I think the kind of skepticism and divisiveness of it comes from also not really understanding it. I can't claim I really understand it, no matter how well you explain the differences between different things. AI is just incomprehensible to me. And I think quite an interesting one, when I was doing the indoor cycling piece, which is up, I asked all of the different app developers, or like the brands, whether they use AI. And almost every single one of them, the first response was this kind of like big sigh, just like they're just a bit sick of speaking about it. Then they all went to define it in a different way, what they use. And they're like, oh, it's not really AI. And I think some of them were more willing to say it is AI. Some of them were like kind of finding a roundabout way, saying, well, we kind of use something similar, but it's not technically AI. So yeah, but brands that have said they are using AI, one of the, I think I remember this really well, writing about it, the Lapierre Celius had a paint job that was AI designed. This was, I think, 2023 when they released the bike. It was a special edition. It was like a funky looking paint job, but they had basically got artists together, and the artists had given prompts to AI, and then the AI came up with the paint job, and then they put it on the frame.
Did it look nice?
I think it looked good. Yeah. But I mean, I think being an artist, like they could have come up with it like on their own. I think it was almost, we will probably get a touch on it, but it was more to put the AI into the marketing materials. It was something unique. It was not just another collaboration with an artist named X. It was, look at this AI-driven paint job. It's like another way of, angling it. Ribble has this bike builder GPT, where I think it helps kind of riders decide what kind of bike would be the best for them. Whether people actually go there or they just go to ChatGPT, I don't know. I think recently, like this week as well, it's pro teams have increasingly, I think, started to also talk about AI, and the training and coaching side of things is where it comes up a lot. I think we talked previously in the podcast about Strava AI, and that's obviously one aspect of it. But say like Whoop and just loads of different kind of wearables, they're saying they use AI in analyzing the data, maybe giving like personalized training programs to their users.
The Strava one confuses me because my understanding is AI stands for artificial intelligence, whereas that's like officially dumb. But joking aside, that you've touched on an area where I actually have found some benefit in terms of applying so-called AI or machine learning to cycling, and that is as a sort of an analysis tool and a tool that can work much quicker than a human can to complement jobs that humans will still do. And I'm specifically talking about like my own training and stuff, and using both Exert and before that Trainer Road. Trainer Road definitely was calling it machine learning initially. I think now they've moved to calling it AI, and Exert definitely uses the term AI to describe what it provides there. But basically they're training plan prescribing and analyzing platforms that use machine learning to sort of analyze what you've done and predict what would be the next best step. And quite often I use it to predict what would be the next best step and then add my own tweak based on experience and what I know I enjoy and stuff like that, which I'm not sure AI will ever be able to replicate that. But I think that's where it's of huge benefit to these pro teams, and that is like there's just so much information available to them now from all the different sensors, all the different apps, all the different data points that they have, and using machine learning in that way to sort of collect all that information, make sense of it, and then give it to the human coach to make a more informed decision.
Yeah, I think with the pro teams where it's really useful is, like you say, when you've got all these new sensors, is you might have 6, 7, 8 independent variables that can all fluctuate relative to each other. And I think for a coach to actually be able to boil that down, especially across a whole teams of riders, you'll be out at the other end of the season before you've worked out what to do in the preseason. So I think this is just another example of AI. It's not necessarily replacing what a human does, like a team coach, but it just streamlines what they can do to allow them to dig deeper and optimize things far further than they could have manually.
Yeah, for me, that sounds like a pretty good use of the machine learning. I guess where I have a problem with it is where it's being used in relatively dumb ways or giving out potentially dumb solutions, which also seems to be a pretty popular way of using it at the moment, just because it's such a buzzy and trendy thing to do. And I think it's worth really noting that currently these machine learning tools like ChatGPT are insanely intensive as far as like power usage and really inefficient in that regard. And I think it's not something we should be ignoring. That, yeah, I guess brands and teams using them, or say coaching programs using this technology, really should be considering whether it's offering real benefit and whether that benefit's worth the cost. That it's, just chewing through electricity more than really
and
anything
water.
else that we do on our computers is, and water. Yeah. So, I think it's just something worth considering as brands continue to dive into this as a feature. Do we need the feature? I'm certain history will tell us that there will be some uses that are legitimate and useful, and there will be 2, 3, 4, 5 times as many uses that are just purely marketing. Yep. And unfortunately, I think right now, the early stages of all this, I think we're currently seeing most of the latter.
Yeah, possibly.
But hopefully, this is just the start of it, and I do think there's useful things coming. The
question is which comes first. Does all that marketing work and all at the moment? Let's assume that it's not done intentionally for marketing. Perhaps it's this is the early phases of the industry understanding and utilizing this technology better, and then the powers that be in these companies say, well, you've gone and spent all this money, you haven't really shown me how it's benefited the product. We're going to have to we'll stick an AI logo on this, and at least we might sell a few more of them. But who knows what learnings and understandings you take from each of those projects that can then be applied and built upon and leveraged in future projects. I sound like I'm working for a brand there, but I don't know.
Slightly. Is there anything that any of you kind of think that has been positive that you've seen and kind of utilizing AI. I mean, Ronan kind of said something that you see as a positive, using AI in terms of cycling.
And like I listed that in my favorite things article at the tail end of last year because it was extremely positive for me. I was using Xert last year, and yeah, it just got me training with more varied array of sessions, which then inspired me even more to do more training. But yeah, I did find that very useful for me.
Dave, is there anything, or you just absolutely don't want to?
No, I'm not against it. I don't think it's in my current workflow for anything at the moment. But I would say that there are areas of excitement. Like there's a bike fitting app that's sort of claiming to
My VeloFit.
Like something like that I think has really cool potential, because I still believe the eye of an experienced bike fitter is invaluable, and I think it'll be many years until like a learning model can even come close to replicating that. But I just think that tech is really interesting because so many people don't ever get to a bike fitter and they just kind of make do with what feels right, even though they have no idea. And I think an app like that could potentially get them, 90%, 95% of the way, and actually prevent a lot of injuries and make people enjoy cycling more than they ever have. So I think something like that could have a really positive effect. But yeah, I mean, for me, in my current day-to-day, it's not something I'm actively using.
My VeloFit was like one of the early adopters here as well. Like I remember talking about those like 2-3 years ago. They came out, and if I now you've just brought it up, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but I don't think they were calling it machine learning or anything at the time. I think they went like dove in 2 feet first AI when they announced it.
So I've actually spoken to Jesse a couple of times fairly recently, who's the founder of My VeloFit, and I from my understanding they use the term AI because they use a couple of different forms of like machine learning. So rather than trying to differentiate that to the consumer, it's just far easier to put it under that big umbrella of AI. But I think where they sit's really, really interesting, because having spoken to him, it's not necessarily that My VeloFit's looking to compete with in-person bike fits. It's more for people that would never have spent the money or the time going to a bike fit clinic.
I mean, that's what the AI coaching services are going to say as well. I don't necessarily believe all that, but
don't fear us while we take your bread and butter away from you.
But with the infused, so there's a couple of different tiers to My VeloFit, but for $35 US, you can have a complete bike fit, or for $75, you can do unlimited bike fits for a year. I think the kind of person that appeals to isn't the same person that would spend $200 or $300 on an in-person bike fit, but they might still have niggles that need ironing out. And I think some of the image capture stuff they're doing, where basically every bike fit that is done is fed in to help subsequent bike fits, is a way that machine learning is actually beneficial to the end consumer. Whether all bike fitters will agree with my view is probably more open for discussion, but I do think there is some merit in products like this existing. Yeah,
my main concern with it, and again, I'm not a user of this product, but as long as it's doing it responsibly, right? Like if someone's using the app for the third time in 3 weeks and still complaining about knee problems, I really hope the app's sending, is suggesting them to seek professional help rather than just continually suggest them keep making changes. I don't know whether it does that or not. But yeah, I do like the idea of it getting people closer than where they probably are now.
Yeah.
Suvi, do you have a favorite AI example?
Paint jobs. 100%.
Fair enough.
No, I wouldn't say so. I think it is, most of it isn't from the tech side. That's the stuff that I tried to think with this topic, because there's the Utopia GPT bike. And I think that was there's a couple other kind of smart bike designs. And that's made me think, like, is it really something I'd like to see, like a smart bike happen, like where you actually kind of are giving prompts? Like there's a Shimano patent for this smart bike design where you give it prompts and like you like what it was doing or you don't like. I think it's to do with setting suspension, your seat saddle angle, all sorts of things. And it made me think, like, would I really want that? Maybe with suspension could be a nice thing, but do you really need it on the bike? Yeah, it's not necessarily something that is my favorite way of going. Like, are we going to have self-riding bikes? I don't know.
Maybe. Automatic shifting's here. But so you mentioned Utopia. What is that?
Yeah, they're a Chinese bike brand that brought out this Utopia. I think it was called Utopia GPT. the bike. Quite a funky design, no seat tube. And they've since launched more bikes that basically take voice commands, and that's pretty much all there is to it. They've integrated ChatGPT into the bike, and yeah.
Can I change my favorite?
No, you can add a favorite.
I'm not going to change. Yeah, I'm not going to change my favorite. I suspect I may have a new favorite in the very near future. Readers of the Performance Process newsletter way back June last year would have seen reference to Aero.chat, which, if you remember, Robbie Ketchell used to work for Garmin Slipstream and then Ineos, and then basically did all the marginal gains for Kipchoge's sub 2 hour marathon. He is developing Aero.chat /AI, which is, I'm looking at it right now on screen, and it's basically, I'm trying to think how I can best sum this up, but basically it's using the camera on my laptop to assess how aerodynamic I am.
Yeah, basically Ronan just keeps sending us these pictures of himself with a green line surrounding
what is the most aerodynamic facial expression?
I'm thinking if I reduce my frontal area here by sucking my cheeks in, that's probably, basically it uses AI contours of
can
me.
You make a fish face and see what that does to the graph?
Well, you see, I popped my head up, so now it's telling me my drag has gone up with that. So it's like narrow handlebars. If you're going to make the fish face, you have to keep the rest of your body narrow as well. You can't suck in your cheeks and pop up your head.
And if you just duck your head completely out of the view of the camera, is it saying you're really aero?
Yeah, as I do that, my drag drops. Right. No, it's not stupid. It's not. It's that. Yeah, I think you've missed a point there, in that I'm using it sitting in front of a laptop. It's designed to be used while you're riding a bike, and so you can't. You can duck your head on a bike, which might reduce your CDA, but you can't disappear off the bike. You have to stay on the bike, and so it factors that in. But I think the important thing here is that we could have done this years ago just by taking frontal area. This isn't taking frontal area. I don't fully understand it yet. We have a podcast with Robbie in the works and an article with Robbie in the works. When this is like a beta version I'm using. When this goes live, we'll delve into that in much more detail. But it's the AI component of this is that it's not just frontal area. It's actually CDA, which is your drag coefficient rather than just your area.
Well, we can maybe add an image, one of these lovely photos, into our article.
Suvi, you're making me think I've sent you that kind of photo before.
You have sent me one with no context whatsoever, and I was like, I don't know what I'm looking at. Your face with green lines around it.
Have you not learned that's how I liked? That's my sense of humor. You don't really know if I'm joking or not.
Yes, I have learned that now.
Good.
Right. I guess our conclusion with AI is that it's not quite unleashed in the cycling realm yet.
Well, that's why I brought that Aero.chat up, because I think it takes something like frontal area that we've always been able to do, and it enhances it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the next steps at least lie.
Yeah. And there's a lot of brands, a lot of different things that are being tried in this sphere, I feel, in cycling. And it's probably a positive in some aspects, but it's probably, like we've said, it's kind of going to go away once the hype comes down. And yeah, we'll see what happens with it, whether we're all going to be on smart bikes sometime in the future.
Fingers crossed not.
Absolutely, fingers crossed not.
Hello, Johnny Long here. I'm usually on the Spin Cycle podcast, but have popped over here to suggest you come try us out when you're done with this episode. We take a different look at the sport of cycling, looking into the weirdest and biggest stories in the sport. And in our member-only After Dark section, we provide the hottest takes that are actually too hot for the public feed. It's a lot of fun, like having a few pals chatting away in your ears. You might as well try it, you might like it. I've got a pal who doesn't like olives, but every year on the same day, he tries one to see if he now likes them. And it hasn't happened for him so far, but you never know. Think of the Spin Cycle podcast like that olive. Give us a go.
We're going to move on to our pick one, but we're actually not going to pick one in this week's show, because we're just going to talk about our pick one's article that is going to go up next week. So we are starting a new series called Collective Favorites. And we're all going to talk about basically it's like pick one section that we've done in this podcast before, but it's in written form. We're all going to tell about our favorite, say, road shoes, which is the first category that we're going to tackle. But what I'm getting to is that members, you can also take part in this. So if you're an Escape member, there's a Discord channel for this. You can find it. There's instructions on Discord how to find it. And then you can submit your own favorite. And we're going to have a little members favorite in the article as well. So we can kind of see if you like the same things as us. Go find that channel on Discord and do send us your favorites. We'd like to hear them. Right, we've got quite a few quick-ish tech bites to go through this week. Starting off with a few industry news, not necessarily positive. Again, REI has closed their experiences division, which is the kind of side of the business that would have done outdoor trips or workshops, so cycling included in that. And they just said it's not profitable enough and decided that they're going to close the whole thing down. And that means over 400 people losing their jobs as well. So not great. Yeah, REI is still going to continue and just, focus on different sides of the business.
Yeah, so I mean, and that business is like basically the biggest group of outdoor adventure, outdoor hiking, biking, camping, sort of retail stores across the USA. So they are massive, but the fact that they couldn't make a sort of like experience division, like as like a expansion of their retail division work is quite interesting. But anyway.
Yeah. We're moving on to Raleigh. British bike maker has reported a loss for the second year in a row. The 2023 result showed that they had a pre-tax loss of £30 million, whereas in 2022 they had a 6.8 million loss. Yeah, it's not. It's not going too great for Raleigh. They still say that they're in a strong position to recover once the markets recover. So that remains to be seen how it's going. They're obviously now owned by Axel Group. Axel also had a CEO change at the same time as these news came out. And Axel itself hasn't been doing too well financially. So it's a story that probably keeps developing.
Yeah, I think given that they went from 6 million loss to 30 million, I think that's a very optimistic stance to say they're in a good position for when the industry recovers. And I think that, the story definitely isn't over in terms of the financials of Raleigh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just for those wondering, like the XL group, it's Hey Bike or High Bike, Ghost, Koga, Lapierre, XLC, it's an accessory brand. They got quite a few brands, and they have been definitely in the headlines amongst the industry for having some pretty hard times, writing off a whole lot of stock and debt in recent time, closing down all sorts of assembly factories throughout Europe. There's been a lot of changes in that company. Raleigh itself in the UK had quite a large downsizing not that long ago, and I guess their financial reports are only further proving the difficulty that they're in, and I guess the difficulty facing the industry larger than that. So anyway, it's one to watch, but it doesn't look good.
No, it doesn't look good, but must say I take my hat off for the optimism that they seem to have, because compared to, say, we talked about Brompton news last week, and since then Brompton CEO has been in the headlines quite a lot, and he seems to be all doom and gloom about all sorts of things, so who knows how it's going to go. We're going to move on to some more positive things. New products have been coming out in the past week. Starting off, OneUp has a clip pedal.
Yeah, OneUp, Canadian brand, certainly more on the mountain bike side of things, but they've just entered the clip market for pedals. So they've had flat pedals out for a number of years, and they've been very popular. But they've now entered the clip market. So for now, this pedal is more what I'd say a gravity style pedal, which is more made for downhill trail bikes, that sort of thing. It's got like an SPD center to it with like a platform around it. But there's some interesting things going on here. And I think if I were to bet on these things, which I absolutely don't, but I would say that they're going to end up having a slimmer, maybe platform-less cross-country version, perhaps a gravel version in the future. And I base that on the fact that they put a lot of effort into making the clip mechanism itself feel more like a road pedal than Shimano's own SPD pedal does. So they're making some claims around getting basically rid of the toggle or like up and down float that you get in a regular SPD pedal, and making it much more like a road pedal in terms of how direct you feel with the pedal system. I think that's, for me, pretty intriguing. On top of that, they also really focused on trying to make the slimmest or thinnest platform surrounding that pedal, and then make it sort of adjustable in other ways with like pin height and stuff. So there's some interesting things going on here. And yeah, just knowing their reputation, they tend to come up with ideas that they feel they can do better or different. So it's one to watch. I'm certainly keen where they go with expanding the pedal lineup.
I'm really interested as well. First of all, the actual platform of a pedal, like you said, looks very similar to like a crank rubber stamp or something similar, like a very thin flat pedal, but with the added security of that clip system. But having used OneUp in the past on my mountain bikes, they also tend to think through servicing very well. So having used their dropper posts in the past, there's very easily accessible service kits. And I don't know if this is the case for the pedal just yet, but I would assume that they've put that kind of design ethos into the pedal, which should mean that, yeah, it should be easy to look after and keep running nice and smooth. Yeah,
my understanding is exactly that. I think there is a custom thin wall socket required to undo the nut in the end. It's not super unique in that regard, but yeah, otherwise it's pretty standard to get into the workings of that pedal and service it. So yeah, it all looks good on paper, and yeah, as you said, like your experience is the same as mine. They make really functional products at good prices. It's a brand to watch, and it's also probably worth noting that they're now part of the Pond Group. So. Which is unexpected. They were kind of quiet about that one, but yeah, they've got some pretty big money behind them now.
And in terms of components, more crank options from RaceFace.
Yeah, RaceFace, another Canadian brand, very near to OneUp. They have just basically expanded their turbine and era cranks. So the turbine's the alloy trail crank, the era is the carbon trail crank. They've now added 160 millimeter length crank options there. So yeah, more trends in short length cranks and demand there. So it's just nice to have options. So I think that's quite cool.
That is exciting. Can't wait for 155s. I did a test the other week.
My e-bike has 155s.
I've ridden 155s as well, and they were lovely. Lots of such high cadence all the time. But there's not many options for that.
You're not tempted to try Hope's 135s?
Nah, that would be... That goes too far. Okay. And last in this section, we have Wolftooth has an update to their air pressure app, air tire pressure app.
This one we spoke about on the podcast a little while ago. Wolftooth got into the free pressure setting app game where they, recommended pressure. You put in all your details, your weight, your bike, your terrain, your style of riding, and then. Yeah, basically they've just added a new update. They're calling it version 2.0. The big difference here is that previously it was only for off-road pressures. They've now added a road option. That road option goes up to tires as wide as 35 millimeters. And then, yeah, all the other disciplines of the app have been upgraded as well to basically allow for wider tires. So there's now up to 60 millimeters for the gravel designation. Yeah, it's cool to see. I previously playing with this app, I found it to be my favorite of the pressure guidance apps for mountain bike use. I also kind of agreed with it where it was telling me to put my gravel tires in terms of pressure. So I haven't yet played with it for the road, but yeah, based on previous experience, I think it's one worth checking out.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I was actually having a play with it earlier before the recording for road specifically, and it did give a slightly higher pressure for me than other calculators had. But then again, I find it very interesting that they have the temperature and in there that you put what temperature you're inflating your tires in, and then what's going to be your riding temperature. And then they give a baseline of what they expect the pressure to be when you're actually out riding. So I find that really interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it gets people thinking about something they probably haven't thought about. If you're if you're inflating your tires in an air conditioned house and then leaving for a scorching hot day or straight into a blizzard, it can be a decent difference. So anyway, it's a neat feature.
I have one more new product that might help us transition to one of the new bikes, because it's a little bit of a triathlon focused product. But I've just got one in, and I think it's
sorry, Ronan, you're breaking up.
Hear me out here, because I think it'll be obvious for indoor training for cyclists who don't also swim and run. It's called the Cool Bottle from EI Tech. EI stands for Endurance Innovation. And basically what it is, it's a deconstructible aero water bottle for between your arms when you're in an aero or time trial position. So between the arms, bottle mount position. And the idea is you fill this thing with ice, or you fill this thing with water, put it in your freezer. It turns to ice, obviously, in there. That's the whole idea of a freezer. And then you add it to your bike, whether for indoor training or for your triathlon or time trial. Not under UCI rules. The reason I'm bringing this up here is because I think it's interesting. We talked last week about those core sensors, with heat being such a major focus for so many in the performance space right now, and the understanding we've gained in the last few years about how important maintaining thermoregulation is. Even just like a 1 degree increase in core body temperature is a significant drop in power output at the pedals. And so that's what this is designed. First of all, like the bottle is designed to cool through the arms, which is apparently an area that is proven to, if you can chill that area, you can cool the whole body. But then also your drink, obviously if you're out in a hot environment, if you're in a hot environment, that ice is going to melt in that bottle, but it's going to melt slowly. And so throughout your session, you're going to have both cooling on your arms and also a cool drink to drink down. So not exactly our focus, but I think it's interesting.
Aerodynamic cooler.
It also makes sense to me that there's a product for triathletes to let them ride with an ice pack for when they crash. So,
Dave, I'll just say that I've done training camps back when I was a semi-pro, or however you want to classify that. I did training camps with world championship winning level triathletes, and uphill, down-dale on time trial bikes, they kicked my ass. So.
Yeah, I will admit I've ridden on Pete Jacobs' wheel before, who's a Ironman world champion, and he kicked my ass in every single way you can ever imagine. So I shouldn't throw too much shade around.
Nice one. Well, as we talk about triathlon and time trials and the likes, there's new bikes in this segment as well. Ronan, do you want to chat to us?
Isn't that just the perfect segue?
That was amazing.
Because there is a new Giant Trinity, and the thing about the Trinity,
last one?
We were just talking about this off air, and Suvi worked out that the last update to the Trinity was back in 2016.
No, because there's also a Liv Avow, that was 2016. Was Trinity at the same time?
Well, it's been a long time. I said it was 1917. So somewhere between 1917 and 2016, Giant last unveiled the Trinity. And now we have a new one. And to be fair, the reason for that delay is valid in that the Trinity has always been considered a very fast bike, but it had rim brakes. And I understand that not from Giant, but I understand just from talking to people in the know that the hesitation and the delay around a new Trinity was just, how do we make sure we don't make a new Trinity that's slower than the old one? Because when you integrate disc brakes, that is definitely a challenge. But at the same time, everything else involved in time trial and triathlon has moved on to disc brakes. And so their hand was forced. They did have to make the move at some point. I understand this bike, we could have seen this bike 2 years ago. We did eventually see it in prototype form under Luc Plapp last year. And now it's been officially unveiled as both a time trial and a triathlon bike, and you can, depending on which designation you go for, you get a different spec delivered to you. But reading through the press release here, you would expect for a time trial triathlon bike it to be all about aero and all that. It's as much about the new bike is lighter while maintaining the same stiffness, so the stiffness to weight is improved, and it's as much about the new fit options that it provides, and it's much more easily adapted and also provides more adjustment range. And then there are some claims about it being 6 watts faster than the old bike at 45 kilometer an hour from plus 20 to minus 20. I need to delve into those a bit more detail before I can really comment on them.
The weight savings were quite considerable. Was it like it was over 500 grams for the Giant Trinity, and for the Liv it was 400 something.
Yeah.
But for Liv as well, there's multiple models for the Giant Trinity, for the Liv. Avow. I don't know how they want it to be said. There's only one model for that.
Avow?
Avow?
It's a V, right? AVOW?
Yeah, Avow.
Yeah, Avow.
Avow.
A bike.
Yeah.
Can I just say, I find it very hard to get excited about TT tech.
There's definitely something wrong with you.
Alex,
Don't
you're not allowed to voice these inner thoughts. We all think it while Ronan's talking about this stuff, but none of us voice it.
I am going to call upon the Performance Process listeners to unite again.
It's always against me.
Yeah, well, before you come out with such comments, you should consider the retribution that it will now be.
Like, I do appreciate what is done in that space. I just find it very hard, especially as just like a recreational rider these days. It's never a bike I'm going to actually want to throw a leg over and go for a ride on, especially the state of the roads in this country.
But Alex, how much of this tech eventually ends up influencing the bikes that you do want to ride? That's the question. It's like, you know, you're never going to want a time trial bike that most people don't. But how much of the new Trinity might inspire the next Propel, and would you want to ride a Propel? You know, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier with AI. It's like, what do you learn from developing this bike that you apply to the next one? And I think I do think that's valid. What the more, I don't know if it's concerning or what, but the thing I want to delve into the new Trinity is like, while more and more brands are again separating their triathlon, their time trial offerings because of the UCI, we can't maximize time trial bikes, but there is no UCI rules in triathlon, so we can get bigger gains there, or we can make them more functional for triathletes. Giant have now rolled the two into one. It gets back to what I was saying earlier about the reason behind the delay for this bike, and what I'm now seeing officially unveiled for this bike doesn't exactly inspire me with confidence that delay wasn't justified. But I'm looking at the press release. I don't know.
Maybe I'm hard to please, but I think I'll be more excited when I see the tech trickle down rather than when I actually see it just on the TT bikes.
It's maybe also the fact that it's very, you know, you could watch the old Trinity and the new Trinity go by and you might not spot the difference unless you're looking very closely.
What, right now? If the old one was rim brake and the new one's got discs?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but I don't think...
That's a difference even I would...
Well, they're both going by you so fast you wouldn't.
Oh, true. Yeah, because of the 51 different arm positions that you can now adopt. I don't know how many there were. Anyway, we're going to move on. Exciting news.
So from a bike that has potentially endless fit options to one that just has a single handlebar width. Suvi, tell us about the new Basso SV.
Yeah, so Basso has a new bike out, which is a bit of an, I guess, many brands now say their bike is versatile and it can do it all. And Basso is going that line as well. The new SV is replacing the Diamante SV. So Diamante will stay in the range. And this one is going to be like a performance road bike, but for the everyday riders. That's how Basso claims it to be. Has a 35mm tyre clearance.
Is it their Cervelo Caledonia?
Not really.
Basically?
No.
Oh, okay.
I guess it's similar. It doesn't have down tube storage that doesn't work.
Sure.
But it is slightly different geometry as well. It's still longer. Like, it's not really an endurance bike. So it's still longer, even though they've raised it a little bit. It's still not as tall as their more endurance bikes from Basso themselves. So it's somewhere in the middle. It's this one of these bikes that is really hard to categorize.
It's a bit like a Bridge Bikeworks Surveyor.
Okay.
A very niche example. Yeah, everyone's just going to nod and just go, okay, sure, Dave. One. Yeah. All right,
sure.
moving on.
Yeah, anyway, but yeah, by the time you're listening to this, there is an article up on escapecollective.com about the new bike. But yeah, it's a nice looking bike. Visually, probably you wouldn't tell from afar that there's much has changed from the Diamante SV, but there's some aero gains that they've achieved. and some other changes. So they're steering away. Like Basso has been quite traditionalist with their geometries, and this is a step away from that.
You were at the launch, what was it, maybe 2 months ago now?
Oh, more than 2. It was October.
Okay. Yeah, so 3 months. In theory, long enough to have a review up. Can you tell us maybe why you don't have a review up?
Yeah. Well, it's not because I've been lazy. I don't have a test bike yet. So I rode a bike at the launch, obviously, but the bike was too big for me. So it's not exactly the correct size. I could still ride it relatively comfortably, but it's by far not the bike that I want to test. So I'm still waiting for the right size frame to be made, because I think it's probably being made right now. And then it's going to get delivered to me at some point.
And a selfish question for me, can you give us, I mean, you visited Basso, can you give us a bit of background on who or what the company is? Like they're Italian, but are they manufacturing in Italy? What's the story there?
Yeah, so Basso is relatively small Italian brand, started by Alcide Basso, 1978. There's a whole piece about that on escapecollective.com. That's why I have these numbers in my head. But yeah, founded by an Italian man in Bassano del Grappa, where there's a lot of cycling going on around in that region. Many different brands, and yeah, became known for steel frames, and the kind of geometry was their main selling point. I think Alcide really focused on that building. He gathered the data from different riders and wanted to build frames that actually work for the people. And yeah, they now make their carbon bikes all in Italy, manufacture them, build them, and paint them. Some of the aluminium bikes they don't, which is a different story.
Okay, interesting. That's pretty unique. Okay, good to know.
Great. Another new bike from Chapter2. We're going to move on to the other side of the world with this one, Chapter2 Rira. Dave, you want to tell us about that?
Chapter2, it's the brand of Michael Pride out of New Zealand. Basically, they're kind of like a consumer direct frame set brand that sell like high-end carbon frame sets consumer direct, which makes it interesting, unique business model. But yeah, they've got the Rira, which is like this another new sort of all-round performance edging road bike. It kind of sounds like, on paper, it sounds very similar to the Basso SV in terms of the customer it might be going after. But yeah, frame set, you're looking at a $2,500 or $2,550 for a frame set. You've got to add approximately $550 handlebar on top of that for their new handlebar, or there's an older handlebar for less. But yeah, the frame, it's using a round 27.2 C-post. It's got a UDH on the back. It's got a lot of modern features. But the thing that kind of stands out to me is perhaps a little odd. It's just the somewhat limited tire clearance. It's basically officially clears a 32 in the rear, which, I think will limit its reach for, it claiming to sort of be the all-rounder road bike that it claims to be. But yeah, I mean, Chapter2, they historically do really amazing looking paints and really fun sort of paint, and it's still worth looking at if you're in the market for a new road frame set.
It does sound similar to the Basso in that, yeah, that kind of all-round, but everyone just has a different definition for what that is, because some brands will go 35mm clearance as a gravel bike and some won't. But when we're talking about tire clearance, Stinner has a new addition to their Select range. So the kind of stock-sized frames that they make. So they would have usually make custom frame sizes. They've launched this Select range where there's 6 sizes available, preset sizes, and Refugio is their newest model in that. It is an adventure bike. That is how they describe it. Yeah, so the Refugio has clearance for 50mm tires and loads of mounts, adventure style bike. And the main thing, I guess, to mention about Stinner is their bikes are all US made.
In-house, they do, titanium and steel, but I believe these are all steel as far as the stock geometry ones go.
Yes, yeah, they're all steel bikes. And yeah, complete build with SRAM Apex axis kind of build starts with just shy of $4,000 and $1,700 for a frame set. So considering it's kind of, I guess, semi-custom, they say it's an affordable frame. That's debatable, but still.
Yeah, I mean, it's affordable is an individual thing, but it's I would say $1,700 US for a US made frame that they've made themselves is very competitive. So it's certainly a nice option. And yeah, it's sort of, you'd normally associate a US made American bike to be, like most people are probably thinking it's probably the price of, say, a Specialized S-Works, and US $4,000 certainly isn't that. So it's nice to see these things at a price point that many more people can afford.
Mm-hmm. I think especially if you live close by, I think it's just nice to see that bikes are made, that you could actually buy a bike that is made somewhere where you know the location. That's all the tech bites from this week. We're going to hand over to Dave and Brad for the Ask a Bench questions.
Hey Brad, how you doing?
Hey Dave, I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Very well, very well.
It's good to see you.
Yes, always good. Always enjoy these catch-ups. Brad, I'm just gonna jump straight into the questions. So, let's hear a question from a no-name caller asking about a Specialized crux.
Hey, Geek Warning. I recently brought my crux to an independent bike mechanic and was advised to stop riding the bike due to a ring of death forming near the lower bearing on the fork. We had tried a number of solutions to the loose headset, but the issue persisted. I then brought the bike to a Specialized dealer and they submitted a warranty claim for a fork replacement. Specialized approved the claim for the new fork, but doesn't have any in stock. In the meantime, Specialized sent a new headset out to the shop. The shop called today and said the bike is ready and good to ride, and they'll let me know when the new fork has arrived. I've seen the indent from the bearing on the fork. Would you ride this? Any other advice?
All right, so Brad, this issue is actually seemingly more widespread than you'd believe, which is that it's something that had been discussed on like our Escape Collective Discord channel with quite a few people that own the Crux, the current Crux, had experienced this, where basically like the top headset is almost bottoming out on the frame and is not allowing adequate compression. And so you both get a headset that equally feels too tight at the same time, but actually is loose and allows the fork to basically shift and give this ring of death. And it's even something I experienced when I reviewed the Crux DSW. I had the same issue, and it seems kind of related to like the use of like a plastic compression ring that might be like compressing under use and then, or shrinking under use, and then it's, the issue comes out. So I've heard of people fixing this with different headsets, but in this case, it sounds like the headset was run loose enough for long enough that the ring of death ensured, and the fork is now damaged. So, I mean, what's your take on this?
Well, one of the things that jumped out at me when I read this question initially, and I found a little bit surprising, was that Specialized considered this a warranty in the first place, which in a subtle way acknowledges that there might be some issue that they are responsible for, which is not entirely uncommon, and things do happen. And like you said, the split wedge, the compression ring. I've also griped about this in the past, not just Specialized bikes, but bikes in general these days with integrated front ends, a lot of plastic spacers, a lot of plastic top bearing covers. Plastic is a compressible material, even if only slightly, but it's only slightly that it needs to in these very tight tolerance fittings and assemblies. And, in my experience with like pro bikes, oftentimes pros want to go as low as possible. Sometimes that means running non-stock top bearing covers anyway. And when you do that, and when you take the stock things away, sometimes you have to play with the gap a little bit. And they make those very, very thin, like 1/10 of a mil steel, little micro shims that you can stack on top of that compression ring to achieve enough clearance between the top bearing cover and the frame, the top of the head tube of the frame itself, so you don't get that drag. Because, once it's bottomed out, it does feel tight in your hand when you're actually turning the wrench to create the preload on the headset. But oftentimes it's only that you've made contact between two things that shouldn't be in contact. Meanwhile, the bearing's not adequately preloaded, and you still get some of that looseness.
Yeah. You basically bottom out the headset without tightening the bearings.
Correct. And so sometimes too on a new bike, if there's like fresh grease in there, you don't always feel the looseness yet. And it takes a few rides to displace the grease enough where the looseness, begins to present itself. And unfortunately, especially on modern bikes with carbon steers, it doesn't take too many rides to develop the ring of death, which is a topic that has frequently popped up on our podcast over the last, year or so. So with that being said, I'm a little concerned about the shop suggesting that you continue to ride it because it is the ring of death after all, and it earned that name for, basically for a reason. Once you put that deep gouge in the steer of the fork, it is not really something that I feel safe saying you should continue to use. It does depend a little bit on the severity of it. I would, I would say if it's very, very slight and minor, okay, kind of maybe. But if it's like
maybe,
temporarily, like as a to patch between now and when that new fork is actually sent out, when it becomes available, then be careful. I would say too. But it does feel to me like this is a sort of, without saying so, an acknowledgement that there was some problem somewhere in the specs of the bike, whether it's having the correct kind of tolerances in the headset and the top bearing assembly or whatever the case. They're saying, we screwed up. But that's how it sounds. That's how it reads to me. Because, if as a customer, in our shop, we see, and actually since we've started this podcast and we've been talking about the Ring of Death kind of relatively frequently, a number of customers have actually come into our shop here in DC, where Greg and I kind of put a lot of emphasis on this because it is, a real safety concern. And we've definitely replaced, half a dozen forks in the last 3 months for this issue specifically, and none of them were under warranty, I might add. Mm-hmm. So it's generally regarded as a maladjustment, let's say, or a failure to install it correctly. And so for a brand to kind of own it and replace it is either like a favorite of the shop, or perhaps, Dave, to your point, where you've, encountered this issue more than one time, it's more of a misspec.
Yeah, so I guess, just going back to the question of would we ride this? If it was like the most minimal of line, I would consider riding it temporarily until it got replaced. If it was a deep gouge or groove, absolutely not. I think I would think the shop has consulted with Specialized, and it's probably Specialized saying, go ahead and ride it, it's safe. So in that case, and I hope that's the case, that the brand itself has been involved in this conversation. It's not just a shop mechanic making this call, but yeah, I would say if the shop has done its due diligence on this and has the support of the manufacturer, then I would follow that advice. But yeah, case by case basis, definitely a gray area.
I would say too, Specialized over the last couple of years, 5-6 years, has had a few steer tube related warranties and recalls, where now I'm seeing both, like on the new Tarmac, for example, the compression. Have you seen this, Dave? The compression plug on the Tarmac SL8 that has like an aluminum sleeve that extends like 5 centimeters or maybe like 8 centimeters deeper.
I honestly believe it's one of the safest systems on the market.
Yes, me too.
It's one of the only systems on the market with a failsafe.
Exactly. And it's like overbuilt. The steer is thicker. Yeah. Like the carbon material is thicker than average, I would say, or than normal, or what I see on other brands. So, I don't want to say it's totally fine, but I will say that Specialized is kind of erring on the side of caution these days in the steer tube specifically. So, if it's only a few, kind of a new bike, if it's not that old and you haven't been riding it a ton like this and it hasn't developed a very deep gouge, then realistically it's probably okay for a while, but I wouldn't like push it basically. Yeah.
And if you do have a modern crux, just double check that your headset is doing what it should, and maybe have it inspected for this groove and follow appropriate steps. I mean, if there is any sign of loosening in your headset, I would consider replacing that top bearing, the top section of that headset, and I'd probably be speaking to your dealer about whether it's covered under warranty. It's something I've experienced. It's something others have experienced. So, anyway,
maybe worth mentioning too. Once the top bearing has developed that ring of death, like it has a little bit of a step where the compression ring itself sits against the steerer. It often will not tighten adequately ever again because the ring actually sits in that groove, and there's like a step that it would have to jump out of, which it can't because of the nature of the design. And so once it's there, there's not really like a good way to ever tighten it again correctly. So I'm a little bit miffed also with the suggestion that you continue to ride it, because I wonder what has been done, if anything, to overcome that. You can kind of sand it down, which we do sometimes too.
I mean, I think they're saying continue riding it until we get stock of the new fork, rather than this is a solution. So
definitely, I agree with you there.
All right, next question. We've got Rob from the UK with a question about a Giant bicycle and drivetrain woes.
I've got a new Giant Revolt Advance 2 2024 model. Absolutely great bike. Thoroughly enjoyed riding it. But it's got one annoying thing that I cannot seem to fix. And that is the gears keep jumping up and down on the rear cassette whilst I'm riding. So, for reference, the crankset is the FSA Omega Modular AGX 3248. The cassette is a Shimano CSHG 710, 12-speed, 11x36. And the chain is a KMC X12L1. Now, I've checked and tried and tested a couple of things. I've had myself and a mechanic look at it. Things that we've checked are chain stretch and chain wear. Chain seems fine. Cable tension, all seems fine. And the hanger alignment seems fine as well. I've also re-indexed the bike using the barrel adjuster. Whenever I do this when the bike is in a stand, the gears change smoothly. It's kind of when I'm out on the road, they just seem to jump up and down between two gears. So if you're in the third cog, it'll jump between the third and the fourth, and then back down to the third and then up to the fourth. The direction of jump always seems to be from the smaller to the larger cog. If you've got any suggestions of how I can fix this, we'd really appreciate it. Thanks.
Brad, what do you suggest?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Rob. This is a good question. It's kind of a curious question, and we have some thoughts, but maybe not a definite answer for you on this one, I would say. First of all, I don't love mixing drivetrain brands all that much. I would probably steer you toward a Shimano chain to go with your cassette. I like to keep those two brands together. They're typically designed to work together. The kind of profile of the teeth, the ramping on the cassette, each cog is kind of designed to match with the chain. And sometimes you get some less than perfect shifting performance when you blend them, although yours seems a little bit extra. Let's call it a little bit extra. So one thing I might suggest that you try before you go overboard here is just to take the tension, which can be done via a barrel adjuster, presumably on your bike. If you dial the tension on that rear shifting cable back, so there's less tension, in other words, just to see whether that improves things or not. That is one suggestion that might help you to know if it's just sitting a little bit too close to that next cog up. And if in fact your derailleur hanger is straight, I would then ask, have you crashed the bike? Has it fallen over? Is the parallelogram on your derailleur or the cage of your derailleur also perfectly straight? In my experience with recent Shimano especially, it can be quite easy to bend or slightly alter the perfectness of the parallelogram movement. And sometimes in some gears, and it may even change between small and big ring, you might notice some curious shifting that a straight hanger doesn't fix, or seemingly correct in the work stand cable tension doesn't fix. But sometimes the movement is not, the step one gear to the next is thrown off just a little bit by a slightly bent parallelogram or the cage of the derailleur itself. That kind of are the things that really jumped to my mind. But what do you think, Dave? Do you have any thoughts on that one?
My first thought is, if you've already taken it to mechanic and you get the bike back and the issue still presents, I would probably be saying find yourself another mechanic that perhaps puts the time in and actually test rides it to be confident. Because there's a lot of mechanics that wouldn't be happy giving you a bike back that had this issue. It just, the gears shouldn't do this. So I would think getting it reassessed, because it could be, it could be a kinked cable that's causing this. It could be a broken bit of housing. It could be, as Brad said, a bent derailleur itself, which the only real way to diagnose that is either find a mechanic that has a very good eye for that stuff, or that has a derailleur they can put on the bike to rule that out as being the issue. I think there's a lot of things here that a lot of time and pain could be saved by just taking it to a different shop and explaining the issue and getting to the bottom of it. Because maybe even these 12-speed derailleurs really need a very accurate derailleur hanger alignment. So if you're just looking at it by eye, or if the tool being used has a lot of slop in it, maybe it's not good enough. So I think there's a lot of things here that we probably can't answer without having looked at the bike ourselves, but I would agree with Brad's assessment that maybe it's a chain issue, maybe it's a derailleur alignment issue, whether it's in the derailleur or the hanger itself, but there could be some other factors here. And rather than you spend weeks and weeks trying to track it down while being frustrated and not liking the bike, I think a good mechanic should be able to come to the bottom of this within an hour of labor.
Yeah, that's a good point too, Dave. And I kind of maybe assumed too much also and gave the benefit of the doubt where perhaps wasn't warranted. But yeah, a good mechanic is worth their weight in gold, and once you find them, you stick with them for life. And that's kind of the nature of it. So there's a lot of things can cause little quirky shifting issues, but they're usually something that by isolating your variables one at a time should be traceable to one thing or the other. So good luck with that one, but it definitely should not be giving you any problems at all. I mean, GRX is rock solid normally and is a very durable and stable system that doesn't, once it's set up correctly, in my experience, it takes a lot to undo that. So
I would argue that slightly in that 12-speed mechanical GRX is more sensitive than previous generations.
Well, sure, yeah.
Just because there's more cogs, it just is more precise, and there's more cogs thrown in between the same sort of space, and it's all tighter, and that applies. I also find the same with, say, 12-speed Campagnolo versus 11-speed.
Yeah, definitely.
Campagnolo.
Oh my God,
I you should be able to get the system set up to a point where it is flawless. So, anything like it jumping between two gears whenever you're riding is not good enough. So, there's things to be tracked down there.
Campy's the worst of the 12-speed tight tolerance, fine tolerances. But I think that the GRX group and like 12-speed Shimano in general, when it's set up correctly, should work perfectly, basically, and not to say it's easy to set it up 100% perfectly, but once it is, like, it should not be giving you any issues whatsoever.
Yeah. Next question actually comes from yet another familiar voice. If anyone listens to the Spin Cycle podcast on the Escape Collective Network, you may recognize this voice. Of course, it's not about bike tech.
Hello, Geek Warning podcast. Johnny Long here from England. Now, I know you're used to answering questions about bikes, but if you think about it, bikes and chairs are very similar. And I currently have as my desk chair, I think, the world's squeakiest desk chair. You could just hear it there, and there. Very distracting. I'm not even moving that much. And weirdly, when I pull out the little thing on the side that lets you fully recline, it then doesn't make much of a sound. That's all of the technical details I can give you, but I don't really know who else to go to with this problem. So if you could help me out, I would be very, very grateful. Thanks.
All right, Brad. Johnny is notoriously anti-bike tech, so it doesn't surprise me that he'd ask us a question that actually isn't related to bikes. But what do you say? I mean, a mechanic can actually fix quite a few things, and a chair, an office chair, does have something in common. Johnny's not wrong. It does have a few things in common. Common tools with bicycles. So, what do you recommend for a squeaky chair?
This is a funny question. I actually love it because, little known fact, one of the things I spend the most amount of money on in my life is vintage furniture. And
I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, not to say I spend a fortune on it, but I don't have a fortune to spend. And if I did, I probably would. But I have a lot of like vintage mid-century furniture in my house. And among them is like if you're familiar with the sort of vintage kind of 60s, 50s, 60s era tulip tables and tulip chairs, where the base is kind of like a circle and it has a nice tapered single kind of little post, and the chair sits on top of that. I bought one of these tables and chairs recently, or about a year and a half ago, and they squeaked, Johnny. So what I noticed was they basically the chair themselves kind of swivel on top of the single like spindle or the post that it perches on top of, and the assembly is not unlike a headset on a bicycle, at least fundamentally. You have to kind of create preload to eliminate looseness where there's like a kind of jiggly feeling in the chair. I had to actually take the cushion off and then take the seat off the chair, adjust the mechanism so there was no play. I happened to have some I used Philwood oil actually, which is like kind of my do-it-all
Tenacious.
lube, yes, tenacious oil on the assembly, and sure enough, it fixed it right up. And so my suggestion to you, Johnny, would be to look closely at the assembly of the chair, see if there's some common tools or bolts, fasteners, or whatever, where you might have the tools and you can actually dig in there. My experience also with like cars a lot of the time is that the assemblies are quite simple. If you're familiar with how bikes are assembled, it's like the worst bike is like how cars are assembled, and like the hardware used is like super cheap compared to what you would have on a fancy bike. So like a cheap bike, they tend to squeak and become loose through use over time. And sometimes you just have to take it apart, they're assembled dry, no grease or anything, in my experience with my chairs. And so simply taking it apart, taking the time to tighten things down adequately so they still move the way they're supposed to without having looseness or extra play within the whatever mechanism your chair has. Not familiar with this exact chair, but I have a feeling it could probably be resolved with a little bit of kind of heavy lube or some grease and some contacting points where there's some pivots or attachments. And I bet, Johnny, that you can resolve this in a pretty short afternoon of work with a beer or two in your hand and a little bit of time.
So my advice, knowing that Johnny probably doesn't have a mid-era 1960s collector's item chair.
You don't have to.
And it's probably something from IKEA or Aldi.
Maybe he built it himself. Maybe that's the problem.
Flip it upside down, check all the bolts that you can see, put a tool on them. It's probably a screwdriver or a hex key. Maybe it's a spanner. Make sure everything's tight. And then what I'd do is lay down maybe some paper towel in between the mechanism. that is where you think the noise is coming from, where that handle is. Lay down some paper towel, squeeze it in there, so you're not putting grease and lube all over the material of the chair. And then get yourself, just because we're DIYing it, get yourself some spray grease from the hardware store.
That's the easy way.
Lithium spray grease. It's going to last longer than like a WD-40. And just spray it on things that contact things, and then wipe away the excess and enjoy
don't spray it on the seat where it contacts your pants. Yeah, don't do that though.
Yeah.
Unless that's where the squeak's coming from.
Yes. Yeah. Make sure that's not you that's squeaking.
If you're squeaking in your chair, that's a different solution altogether.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you, Johnny. We're gonna go back to bikes now. All right, lucky last for this week. We've got Todd from Brighton here, Brighton in the UK. We've got an interesting question. It's a little bit different to our usual tech questions, so let's hear it.
Love the show, even though most of the components you talk about are worth about as much as my entire fleet of 5 bikes. My favourite of those to ride at the moment, because I get to ride it with my 8-month-old daughter, is my home take on an e-cargo bike, which is an old ex-Royal Mail Pashley Mail Star that was refurbed by a charity called Elephant Bike, and I purchased it and added a mid-drive e-bike motor to it. It runs with Sturmey Archer drum brakes, which are epic and maintenance-free as far as I'm aware, but they've developed a bit of a stick on first braking, often at the start of the ride, but it can be quite violent. I've spoken to the local bike co-op, and they've never heard this problem before, and most of the time they say they've had them come in and they don't stop at all. And I'm wondering if trying to get rid of this little stick at the start of the braking is kind of be careful what you wish for. If I dismantle them, I might lose all braking performance. And this is being a pretty heavy bike with some pretty precious cargo, I definitely want it to be able to stop. So yeah, any advice on servicing drum brakes? Is this something for a home mechanic to do in their garage like me, or should I be taking it to professional? Should I be doing it at all? Thanks so much for everything you guys do. Keep up the good work.
All right, Todd. Truthfully, I mean, drum brakes is not something that Brad or I are experts in. We're quite happy to admit that. I mean, they kind of come from a time in the bicycle world before our time, and Brad and I sort of come from the more performance end of cycling, where drum brakes haven't been used for forever. But yeah, with that, I mean, we've both pulled them apart enough to know that, one, if you do pull them apart, be careful, because older drum brakes often use asbestos as a braking material. So just be careful there. Use appropriate protection. Maybe wet it down with an alcohol or something, so you're not putting dust in the air. But yeah, you can actually access these brakes with pretty basic tools. Typically, you'd remove the wheel and you'd probably need like a 17mm spanner to undo a lock nut, and then you'd be able to remove the brake from the hub. And what I'd be looking for is signs of corrosion and pitting inside. So you basically want the brake pads, the two shoes of the brake that sort of expand up into the hub on a drum brake. They should be pretty even in thickness all the way around, and the hub shell itself should be pretty smooth and clean inside. So any signs of corrosion on either is probably your most likely issue. And yeah, any sort of unevenness through the brake shoes would explain it. I would also be looking to lubricate the pivot when you pull on the cable, it moves this cam that then expands the brake shoes. I'd be lubricating that, because that might be really sticky. So what might be happening is that you're like putting a lot of force through the lever, and then it's sort of breaking free and all of a sudden grabbing, and that's what you're experiencing. And then once it's grabbed, it sort of settles into its position. So there's a few things that are going on there. But yeah, I think generally speaking, with a little bit of basic maintenance and maybe a little bit of sanding of those pads if they're not too unevenly worn, you should be able to get this back on the road pretty easily. That said, given that you're carrying your kit on this, and it is a safety critical component, I wouldn't mess around with it if you're not really confident in its operation. And for that, I actually found someone that's somewhat of an expert on all things STEMI Archer, and they just happen to be about a 30-minute drive away from you. So colwoodwheelworks.co.uk, yeah, they appear to be in Sussex nearby to you, and yeah, they specialize in drum brakes and hubs from STEMI Archer. So there you go. What are the chances? So yeah, if it's not something you're keen to do yourself, it sounds like you've got an expert very nearby you. So Brad, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, my hunch was that it was a corrosion related issue, whether it was in the pivot or in the actual if you have a very worn pad where your bike has been sitting for a short period of time unused. Sometimes you get like a metal on metal contact within the brake itself inside the drum, as it were, which might just need to be like kind of unstuck one time, it sounds like, but it's it's hard to say without seeing it. You can often kind of resurface. That's a bit of a technical sounding term for sanding down the surface where the brake pad touches inside the hub, but you resurface it, but if there's corrosion, like Dave said, sometimes simply cleaning and sanding those rough spots off, if they do exist in there, is the first way I would approach it. Second being obviously moving pivot points if they haven't been in a long time, and it sounds like that might be the case too with your particular brakes in the shop that doesn't really want to touch them. So sometimes things need to be touched, especially when they're kind of older, which these are. And but yeah, to Dave's point, if you have an expert down the road, hard to beat somebody who has a ton of experience with these things, to get it solved kind of once and do it right and never have to think about it and worry about it yourself. So yeah, if it's anything that's a little bit unfamiliar because it's a brake and because it's an 8-month-old daughter who's your pride and joy in life, it's probably worth a few bucks to drive down the road to Sussex and see if those guys can't help you out.
Yeah. Anyway, let us know how you go. It's kind of a fun one. It's a bit outside.
Yeah, I'd love to hear some resolution on this one, because it's not something that I've worked on a few tandems with drum brakes in my life, but I wouldn't say I've developed a ton of expertise in the drum brake department over the years. It's not one that I've seen much, and when I do see them, it's once every 5 or 7 years or something like that these days. So certainly if there's somebody who professes to be an expert of STEMI Archer and of drum brakes, that would be who I would be in touch with right away, first and foremost.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, yeah, I guess that's the end of the questions for this week. We're absolutely going to be back next week, Brad, and more questions.
Yes.
But yeah, if we're running a few weeks behind in terms of getting to everyone's questions, so just be patient if you don't hear yours straight away. But if you do have a question, then you can submit it to escapecollective.com/hello. That is where you would record your question. Please introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from. Tell us what bike you're on, and then ask your question. If possible, keep it brief where possible. And yeah, just a reminder that asking a question is exclusive to members of Escape Collective who make all of this possible. So yeah, any members, jump on. Brad, great to hear from you again. We'll do this again next week.
Looking forward to it, Dave. Yeah, I love the questions, and I love kind of the thought-provoking nature of them, and it gives us something to chat about and think about kind of for the whole week long during the time between episodes. So looking forward to next week's.
Yeah, same feeling, Brad. Looking forward to it.
Well, that's starting to be all from us this week. But before we go, we'd like to tell you about the other content that we've got up on at escapecollective.com this week. Ronan, what do you have?
Matt Deneve just published an article on the headline, or the title is "The Silly Online Cycling Battle That Became So Much More," and I want to mention this one. I'm only about halfway through it this morning before we had to hop onto this call to record the podcast. But as a big fan of Wanderer.earth, and having been introduced to it by Matt back at Cycling Tips days during the pandemic before I worked there, I can relate to what Matt is talking about here, and the whole idea of Wanderer is you try to ride new roads and tick off new roads that you haven't ridden previously. The Wanderer.earth online app sort of keeps track of that for you, and you can just see which roads you've ridden before and which you haven't. And Matt got sucked into trying to tick off as many kilometers in his local area as possible. And then there's leaderboards and all that Matt was trying to claim top spot on. So I haven't got the whole way through the article yet, but where I have got so far, I'm like, yeah, I know that feeling. Yeah. And for those who aren't aware of Wanderer, check out Matt's article there. I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy what it is.
It's a fun read. Dave, you got anything?
Yeah, I'm just going to shameless plug my own work. Unfortunately, it's a disgrace to do it, but yeah, I mean it's kind of during the Christmas break, I spent a lot of time trying to find hood covers for some old Dura-Ace 11-speed levers, and simply couldn't find them, and found all sorts of Reddit threads explaining that these things no longer exist, and people talking about fitting like Ultegra hood covers and trimming edges off of them to make them fit better and all this other nonsense. And yeah, thankfully I was able to find some aftermarket alternatives for these hood covers, and they also happen to make alternatives for all sorts of other hoods that you think are no longer supported and are officially no longer supported by the likes of Shimano. So yeah, if you've got some older Shimano levers and you need hood covers and you can't find them online, then head to that article where you'll find the answers to that. And then the other shameless plug of mine is just threaded for this Friday is all about bike travel. So basically it's I'm an old weight weenie from like, early days of weight weenies. I used to hang out there, and for me, like flying with a bike allows me to like be a weight weenie about tools. So I've basically written an article dedicated to that absolute geekery. So that'll be out basically when this podcast publishes. So head to the website to see that. And then Alex, you've been busy. What do you got?
Yeah, so I've got, what would it be? The fourth part of my second tier helmet review series. That will be live on the website by the time this goes out, and it's looking at what is Kask's best-selling helmet, the Mojito. Now in its third generation. I spent some time over the Christmas break getting acquainted with it, and the full review will be out where I share my thoughts.
Nice one. That's plenty for you to read, and there's even more when you just head over to escapecollective.com. As always, thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.